The gate at Wren's Hollow had stood unpainted for 6 years, and on the morning everything changed, 2 of Silas Cauldwell's men were nailing a notice to it. Etta Wren watched from the fence rail, 7 years old and silent as she had been since her mother died, her eyes fixed not on the paper, but on the iron brand burned into the gatepost beneath it. A looping W with a single curved line beneath, like a wave under a bird. She had traced that shape with her finger every morning of her life without knowing why it mattered. She did not know yet that a woman was coming who would teach her. Tobias Wren came out onto the porch with his shirt half buttoned and read the notice without touching it. Boundary dispute. Grazing rights. A survey requested by Cauldwell Cattle Company, effective the 1st of the month. He did not raise his voice at the men. He never did anymore. He simply said the word leave once and watched until they rode off toward the Cauldwell spread, 3,000 head strong and growing, swallowing smaller outfits the way a river swallows creeks in springtime. Then he looked at his daughter, who had not spoken a word since the funeral, and he looked at the empty house behind her, and he understood that he was losing more than land. The ranch had not always worn this hush. Before the fever took Faith Wren 3 years past, the house had rung with noise most mornings, pots knocking, Faith singing off key while she worked the churn, Etta laughing at nothing in particular the way small children do. Tobias remembered it now only in fragments, the way a man remembers a country he can no longer find on any map. He had buried his wife in the spring and watched his daughter go quiet by summer, and in the years since he had done what he knew how to do, which was work. He rose before light and worked until his hands would not close around a tool anymore. And still the house sat empty in a way no amount of labor seemed to fix. 2 housekeepers had come and gone in that time, both driven off inside a month by the silence, by a child who would not speak and a father who could not. The arrangement with Clara Doyle had been made 2 weeks earlier, through a letter forwarded by the church in Millbrook. A widow, 31 years old, sought honest work, cooking, mending, keeping a house in order in exchange for board and a small wage. Tobias had written back only 4 lines. He needed someone who would not talk his ear off, who would not mind a quiet child, and who understood that this was work. Nothing more. Clara's reply had been shorter still. She understood work. She had been doing it alone for 3 years, since a fever took her husband on a homestead in the Nations and left her with nothing but a trunk, a satchel, and the particular steadiness of a woman who has already survived the worst thing she expects to survive. She arrived on the Tuesday stage with that trunk, the canvas satchel she would not let the driver touch, and a gray traveling coat gone thin at the elbows. Tobias met her at the crossroads because the walk to the house was long and the afternoon was already graying toward rain. He did not offer conversation on the ride back, and she did not seem to expect it. She watched the land instead, the sagging fence line, the barn roof patched with mismatched shingles, the fields gone to seed where cattle should have been grazing, and something in her face was not pity but recognition, as though she had seen a house give up before and knew the shape of it from the inside. "How many head do you run?" she asked it plainly, watching the empty pasture pass. 40. This season. Used to run near 200. Tobias did not offer more, and for a while the wagon wheels were the only sound between them, grinding over frozen ruts, the horse's breath showing white in the cold. Etta did not come out to greet her. She watched from the loft window of the barn, where she went most afternoons now, and she did not come down even when Clara carried her own trunk up the porch steps, because no one offered to help. Tobias explained the house in the fewest words he could manage, where the well was, which room, what time supper. He explained nothing about his daughter. Clara did not ask. She only said, glancing toward the barn where a small shape had gone still in the loft window, "I'll set a plate for her regardless." It was the first thing she said in that house that was not about the work, and Tobias noted it the way a man notes weather changing, without comment, filing it away. Supper that night was quiet in the particular way the house had been quiet for 3 years, not peaceful, but held. Etta ate at the far end of the table with her eyes down. Clara had cooked plainly, biscuits and beans and a rabbit Tobias had shot that morning, and she did not fuss over the girl or try to draw her out with questions the way the last 2 housekeepers had, both of whom had lasted less than a month. She simply set the plate, refilled the water without being asked, and let the silence be what it was. When Etta finished, she carried her own plate to the basin, which she had not done for anyone else since her mother died, and Clara said nothing about that either, though Tobias saw her hands still for a moment over the dishwater, taking note. Later, after Etta had gone to bed, Tobias found himself lingering in the kitchen doorway longer than the evening required. Clara was scrubbing the last of the pans, sleeves pushed to her elbows, and she did not look up when she spoke. She favors her mother. It was not a question, and Tobias did not answer it as one. Everyone says so. He turned the lamp wick down a notch, watching the flames settle. I don't see it the way I used to. Some mornings I can't recall her mother's face at all, and that frightens me more than the quiet does. Clara set the pan in the rack to dry and dried her hands on her apron before she answered. Grief does that. It isn't forgetting. It's the mind protecting itself so a man can still rise and work a farm. She said it without softness, the way a person states a fact they have already tested against their own life, and Tobias found that he believed her more for the plainness of it than he would have believed comfort. The first thread came 3 days later, on a morning gone sharp with early frost. Clara rose before dawn as she always did, and found on the small table by her door the one that held her satchel, the one thing she had refused to let anyone else carry, a wildflower gone brittle and dry, laid across the strap. She had noticed the flower 2 days before, pressed into the pages of an old book she kept, a book of drawings that had been her mother's, and she had not realized Etta had seen it, had been in the room at all. She said nothing to Tobias. She only kept the flower, and that evening, when she opened the book again to check on the pressed pages inside, she found Etta standing in the doorway, not speaking, only watching, one hand resting on the frame as though she meant to stay this time and needed the wood to steady her. "You can come look if you want." Clara did not turn from the book. It was my mother's. She used to draw. Etta came. She sat on the floor beside Clara's chair, close but not touching, and looked at the pages, brand designs. Dozens of them, careful pen and ink studies of loops and curves and letters worked into iron shapes, each one labeled in small, precise handwriting with a rancher's name and a county and a year. Etta's finger found one page and stopped. She did not speak. She only pressed her small hand flat against the drawing and looked up at Clara with an expression that was not quite a question, because she still had no words for it, but was unmistakably the beginning of one. Clara turned the pages slowly after that, naming what she remembered of each one, a circle and arrow mark for a family up near the territory line, a diamond and bar for a ranch long since sold off, and though Etta said nothing, she leaned closer with each page, until her small shoulder rested against Clara's arm and stayed there. It was the first time in 3 years the child had let herself lean on anyone. Tobias found them there an hour later, both asleep in the chair with the book open between them, Etta's head tucked against Clara's shoulder, one small hand still resting flat on a page of drawings. He stood in the doorway a long moment before he woke either of them, because it was the first time in 3 years he had walked into a room in that house and felt something other than absence waiting for him. He did not wake them right away. He only stood there, holding the lamp low so the light would not disturb them, and let himself feel, for the length of a few quiet minutes, something he had stopped expecting to feel again in that house. The quiet competence came the following week, when the well pump seized and the hired hand who usually fixed such things had gone to town for supplies and would not return before dark. Tobias stood over the pump with his sleeves rolled and his jaw tight, the particular tightness of a man doing arithmetic he did not like. A broken pump, a dry trough, 40 head of cattle that would need water by morning, and no money this season for a man to come out from Millbrook and fix it. Clara came out with a rag in her hands, took one look at the mechanism, and asked him to hand her the wrench. She had grown up on a homestead in the Nations before her husband died, she told him, working while she worked, not looking up. Her father had kept every piece of machinery running with baling wire and stubbornness long after money for parts had run out. And she had learned young that a thing broken was not always a thing ruined. She worked the housing loose, checked the leather seal gone dry and cracked with age, and sent Etta running for a scrap of oiled hide from the tack room without needing to raise her voice to ask twice. Within the hour the pump was drawing water again, steady as it had ever been, and Tobias stood watching the water run clear into the trough with an expression he had not worn in a long time. Not gratitude exactly, but the particular respect a careful man gives to another careful person. The recognition that here was someone who did not need to be managed or worried over, who simply solved what was in front of her. He did not say much. He said, obliged, and meant considerably more than the word carried. And Clara, wiping her hands on the rag, only nodded, because she understood exactly how much a plain word could hold when a man like Tobias Wren chose to use it. That night at supper, for the first time since her arrival, he asked Clara a question that was not about the work, what her father's homestead had looked like, whether she missed the Nations, and she answered him plainly, and Etta listened to both of them with her spoon forgotten halfway to her mouth, watching the table fill with something it had not held in a long while. The days between held a kind of fragile ordinariness that neither adult spoke of directly, for fear of naming it too soon and breaking it. Clara took to walking the fence line with Etta in the mornings before chores, the two of them checking posts for rot the way Clara's father had taught her, and Tobias would watch them from wherever he was working, a small figure and a taller one moving slow along the horizon, and something in his chest would loosen for the length of that watching. He mended the barn roof that week for the first time in 3 years, not because the weather demanded it, but because it seemed, suddenly, worth the effort of a Saturday. Etta helped him hand up shingles, saying little, but staying near him the whole afternoon in a way she had not stayed near anyone since her mother died. The pressure arrived on a Sunday, when Silas Cauldwell himself rode up the lane with 4 men behind him and a rolled survey map under his arm. He was a broad, sun-cured man who had built the largest cattle operation in 3 counties by buying out the desperate and outlasting the stubborn, and he did not dismount when he reached the porch. He informed Tobias, with the flat courtesy of a man who has already decided the outcome, that the boundary fence had always run wrong, that his grandfather's original survey placed the northern grazing line a full half-mile inside what Tobias had always called his own, and that the Wren brand itself, the looping W burned into every gatepost and every hide on the place, infringed on a mark the Cauldwell family had registered with the territory first, decades back, before the county even kept proper records. It was not simply land he was after. It was the name. If the brand could be proven Cauldwell's by first claim, the boundary would follow it, and Tobias would lose not just grazing rights, but the mark his own father had burned into that gatepost the year the ranch was founded, the mark Etta had traced with her finger every morning of her life. Cauldwell said he would bring it before the county land office within the month, and that Tobias would be wise to sell before the ruling made the sale worth nothing. "You've got a fine little outfit here, Wren." Cauldwell surveyed the house, the barn, the thin cattle in the near pasture, with the unhurried eye of a man pricing something he already considered his. Be ashamed to lose it to a court fight you can't afford. I'd sooner buy it clean and let you keep your dignity." Tobias stood on the porch with his hat in his hand and said nothing for a long moment, because there was nothing to say that would not sound like begging, and he had promised himself years ago he would not beg Silas Cauldwell for anything. "This land was my father's before it was mine. I'll see the county office before I see it sold." Cauldwell only smiled, the smile of a man who had heard that line from a dozen ranchers before Tobias and watched every one of them sell within the season regardless. He said it all evenly, almost kindly, the way a man delivers bad news he does not consider his fault, and then he turned his horse and rode back down the lane, leaving the notice fluttering against the gatepost like something already half buried. Tobias did not sleep that night. Clara found him at the kitchen table past midnight with the lamp burned low, a ledger open in front of him that told him nothing he did not already know, that a legal fight against Cauldwell's money would bankrupt him faster than losing the land outright, that there was no one left in the county with reason enough or courage enough to stand against the biggest rancher in 3 counties, that his father's brand, his father's name, might simply cease to mean anything within the month. He did not ask Clara to sit. She sat anyway, and for a long while neither of them spoke, and then she said, quietly, that she would think on it, because something about the shape of that brand had been nagging at her since the day she arrived, though she could not yet say why. "It's the curve underneath." She traced it in the air above the ledger without touching the page, the same wave under a birdline from the gatepost. "I've seen that exact mark before, and not on any Cauldwell hide." Tobias looked up at her for the first time since she had sat down. "Where?" "I'm not certain yet." She rose, gathering her shawl close against the cold kitchen air. "Give me until morning." In the days between the visit and the hearing, the house held a tension it had not carried, even in the worst of the silent years. Clara spent her evenings by the lamp with her mother's book open across her knees, working backward through the pages the way a person retraces steps in the dark, certain the answer is somewhere underfoot if only the light would fall on it right. Tobias rode to Millbrook twice to speak with the county clerk, a cautious, overworked man who offered him little comfort and less certainty, only the plain fact that a claim 18 years old would need proof older still. Proof Tobias did not have, proof no rancher in 3 counties seemed to have, because Cauldwell had made certain of it long before Tobias was old enough to understand what a survey meant. She found the answer 2 days later, and it was Etta who found it first. The child had taken to sitting with the drawing book each evening now, turning its pages with the particular care of someone handling something sacred, and on the second night after Cauldwell's visit, her finger stopped on a page near the back that Clara herself had not opened in years. It was a study dated 18 years past, a looping W with a single curved line beneath, and beneath the drawing, in her mother's careful hand, a note, "Commissioned this spring. Paid in full. A fine mark for a new ranch." The name Wren written plain beside it. Etta looked up at Clara and pointed at the gate outside the window, then back down at the page, her small face working with the effort of a sentence she had not yet found the courage to speak aloud. Clara went still for a long moment, staring at her own mother's handwriting, at a name she had read 100 times without understanding what it would one day mean. Then she rose, wrapped the book in cloth, and did not sleep again that night. The child's decisive moment came on the morning of the county hearing, in the front room of the land office in Millbrook, crowded with ranchers and clerks and Silas Cauldwell himself, seated with his survey map already unrolled across the clerk's table as though the matter were settled before it began. Tobias stood at the back with his hat in his hands, out of arguments, and Clara stood beside him with her satchel held against her chest, The same satchel she had refused to let anyone touch since the day she arrived, because inside it, wrapped in cloth, was her mother's book. It was Etta who stepped forward first. She had not spoken a word aloud in 3 years. Not since her mother's grave was filled, and the room did not know this, could not have known what it cost her, when she walked past the rows of seated men to the clerk's table, small and unremarkable in her patched coat, and laid the open book down beside Cauldwell's survey map. Every eye in the room went to the drawing beneath her hand. A careful pen and ink study of a looping W with a single curved line beneath it, dated 18 years before Cauldwell's claimed registration, labeled in a woman's careful hand with the name Wren and the words "commissioned this spring," paid in full, a fine mark for a new ranch. Silas Cauldwell went still. Then, in a voice gone thin with disbelief, he asked whose hand had drawn it, as though the answer might yet save him. Etta looked up at him, and her voice, when it came, was small and unpracticed from 3 years of silence, but it did not waver. "Sir, my mother drew that brand." She placed her palm flat on the page, the same way she had the night she first found the book. "She drew every brand in this county before she died. She wrote down who paid for them, and when, and she never once wrote your family's name beside this one." A murmur moved through the room, ranchers leaning toward one another, the clerk setting down his pen to look more closely at the page. Cauldwell looked at Clara then, and understanding moved slowly and completely across his face, the woman he had never troubled to notice. The widow keeping house for a man about to lose everything was Faith Doyle's daughter, and the ledger book he had never known existed had outlived every claim he thought he owned. He had built a fortune on the assumption that no one kept better records than his own family did. He was wrong, and the whole room now knew it with him. "This is a child's storybook." He said it more for the room than for the clerk, reaching as though to sweep the matter aside with the wave of a hand. "It proves nothing." The clerk did not look up from the page. "It proves a date, Mr. Cauldwell, and a signature, and a purchase recorded in a ledger your own family never troubled to keep." He examined the book's dated entries for a long, silent minute, turning back several pages to compare the handwriting, the ink, the careful consistency of a record kept over years rather than invented overnight. Then he looked up and said, in the plain voice of a man relieved to have a decision made for him, that a documented record 18 years prior to any competing claim settled the matter beyond dispute. The boundary would remain where it had always run. The Wren brand would remain the Wren brand. Cauldwell rolled his survey map back up without a word, his jaw set tight, and for the first time in longer than anyone in that room could remember, he looked like a man who had lost something. He did not look at Tobias on his way out. He looked, briefly, at Etta, still standing at the clerk's table, with her hand on her mother's, on Faith Doyle's book. And whatever passed across his face in that moment, no one in the room could later agree on calling it shame, though several of them thought it might have been. Tobias chose in the days that followed, not with a speech, for he had never been a man of speeches, but with a deed that said everything he could not. He rode into Millbrook alone and returned with a fresh pot of paint. And on a clear cold morning, he repainted the gate at Wren's Hollow for the first time in 6 years, the looping W restored bright against new white wood. Beneath it, where no mark had ever been before, he burned a second, smaller symbol into the post with his own hands, a single curved line, the same wave under a bird shape from Faith Doyle's book, worked in beside his father's brand as though it had always belonged there. He worked at it through the better part of a morning, testing the iron's heat against a scrapboard first, mindful of the wood, mindful of getting the curve exactly right. Etta sat on the fence rail and watched him the whole while, the way she had once watched the notice nailed up in its place. Except now, Her hands were still in her lap, and her face was not closed off but open, waiting. He did not tell Clara what it meant before he did it. He simply asked her to come stand at the gate when it was finished, and when she saw the new mark beside the old one, she understood that he was not thanking her for the hearing at all. "That's my mother's hand." Her voice caught on the words, and she pressed her fingers lightly to the still warm iron. "You put her mark on your gate." Seemed a fool thing, letting the woman who drew it stay a stranger to the place. Tobias set the iron down and did not look away from her, the way he had once told the Cauldwell men to leave and meant it absolutely. "I'm not a man who says things easy, Clara, I never have been. But I'd be obliged if you'd stay on past the wage we agreed, stay as more than a woman keeping my house." He was asking her, in the only language he trusted, to stay. She said yes with her hand resting beside his on the freshly painted wood, and neither of them said anything more than that, because neither of them needed to. Behind them, Etta slid down from the fence rail and came to stand between them, small and quiet, and took a hand from each without being told to, and for a long moment the three of them simply stood at the gate together, looking at the two marks burned side by side, saying nothing at all. The warm resolution settled over Wren's hollow slowly, the way frost gives way to thaw. That evening the three of them sat at the kitchen table together, the lamp burning steady, Etta's chair pulled in close between them instead of at the far end where she had eaten alone for 3 years. She had begun speaking again in small, ordinary sentences, asking for the salt, naming the shapes of clouds through the window, and no one in that house treated it as a miracle, only as a thing that had been waiting, patiently, to come back. Clara kept her mother's book on the shelf by the hearth after that, no longer hidden away in a satchel meant for leaving, and some evenings Etta would take it down without asking and turn its pages slowly, tracing the brands with her finger the way she once traced the one on the gatepost, learning the shapes of 100 ranches that had trusted a careful woman's hand a generation before. Outside, the gate stood freshly painted in the dark, 2 marks burned side by side into the post, one old, one new, both now equally hers, and the wind moved over Wren's hollow the way it always had, except that the house it passed over was, at last, no longer holding its breath.